2020 Tantra, Crown Tantra info in the description. So there are no mammals or any animals really that farm their own food. I mean, you can make the argument that some insects like ants and things like that farm fungus, but there's no mammal, especially a land mammal. And there's no mammal in the sea. There's no mammals at all that farm their own food, because that would imply dominion. So cultivation has everything to do with force. Force is rape. Whenever you're forcing something into existence, you're forcing plants into existence, then you force children into existence so that they can work the fields. That's all force. That's your human will or your personal will, your animal bestial will, your animated will. That's living from a very low part of the tree of life. So that's living in a huge state of separation. Again, that's the initial metaphor with the Eve eating the apple, because the apple is somehow not part of her, so she reaches for it and she eats the apple. So that's that initial state of separation where the consciousness of humanity falls into this chasing and this happiness of pursuit lifestyle or death style. So there's no other mammal that you can cite, or animal really in general, that is farming its own food. Again, that would imply dominion. So if you have dominion over the plants and over the land, because you're forcing the land to do things that it wouldn't normally do, cultivation is not natural. You're forcing things to grow when you want them. You're doing selective breeding to make certain appearances, certain tastes, certain colors. Everything that you see on the shelf is artificial, whether it's raw or not. That's the reality that people need to understand. It's been genetically manipulated to taste away, look away, grow at a certain time, all of that. Everything has been manipulated. So you have cultigens, things that grow in supposed nature without the aid of man. Those were cultivated and created and left, because again, you could look it up yourself. The Amazon is essentially a big garden. Humans used to manage it. It was a big garden. And if anybody is, privy to No Forest on Flat Earth, then they really know that every tree is cataloged. They know the colonists went around the world. They logged this entire world for the most part. And none of these forests are natural. They're cultivated forests. So, there are probably some plants that have some genetic structure together. Those will mostly be herbs and smaller plants, because it's the same thing with animals. Again, too, with humans being cultivated, and then you cultivate the plants, because as within, so without. So, but it's the same thing with animals. The rhinos were bigger, the elephants were bigger. Everything was bigger even 100 years ago, but those were the first ones poached and murdered first for their the ivory and everything, or whatever the resource, or just for game, just because people were, for game. But the biggest ones were the ones to be killed. So the animals we see today are really the smallest leftovers, really. And it's the same thing with the plants. The plants are these mutant genetic leftovers that are, basically scraps from what was. And the closest thing that's left is pretty much just the herbs, some coconuts. There's a few things left. But for the most part, these things are all cultivated, or they're cultigens that, again, these forests were big gardens, and humans, were either ran out, displaced, the area was pillaged, and then they left the garden, and the plant continued to propagate. But that doesn't make it necessarily natural. It's the nature of the unnatural. Again, the supernatural creates the natural, and then the natural creates the unnatural. And it's all essentially off of the will of the supernatural ultimately. So there's no right or wrong. Don't get me wrong in that sense, I guess. It's all happening, so it's supposed to be happening. All possibilities have to manifest, and everything does return to its source though. So that's just the point I would like to make here, that no animal is on earth is farming its own food. And you have some animals in symbiosis, some animals that eat some food and then they release their dung, and then that propagates that plant further with the seeds. But that's not any form of trying or any form of force. So that's totally different from tilling the land and managing the land and doing certain things to get certain results based on taste buds, visuals, and to where you can supply yourself with stimulation to do earthly things, because it's an earthly playground, but the ethereal playground has a lot more. It's a lot more satiating. I should say. So less is more always. And that's just the main point, that nothing is farming. There's no thing farming. We're the ones being farmed by the unseen. So and you have a whole process, a whole chain of events there where the humans are being farmed and they farm other humans, and then the humans work the farms, and then they feed the plants to the animals that are being farmed. And it's just the way back, of course, would be to farm plants, stop feeding plants to animals that have been cultivated, because these animals aren't natural. These are, again, selective breeding animals, the animals that have been basically created by man through doctoring, through genetics, to give you a desired trait. So they're not natural. So at this point, it's the nature of the unnatural that we're living in. So we got to take the steps back, because the path forward seems to go back. So like the path into the light seems dark. So it's basically, the process of return. That's really about it. Is you would definitely cut back, make your process back to vegan, to raw vegan, to less and less and less and less liquids, and then totally spirit, because breath is spirit, or cosmic energy, what have you, whatever you would like to entitle that. So that process would be, of course, to stop eating animals, then stop, feed, because you have to feed animals plants. You have to grow plants, force them into existence to feed the fake animals. Then people eat the animals. It's ridiculous. So instead of feeding, housing, and watering animals, you give that to the people in the world that need to be sheltered. They need water, and they need to detox, and they need plant foods to realize what they don't need. Then they go from that to less and less. It's a process of reduction, because again, negation is creation, reduction is production. The oneness has to differentiate itself, or separate itself, break itself down into limitation to have separation, have forms, have experience. So the process of reduction, reducing infinity, is the process of creation. So the process back to the source is to drop things, let things go. And every day it's more and more that you drop, and then less is more. So that's more so the process of returning to the source, to the inner being, to the inner verse. And that's really about it. 2020 Tantra, Crown Tantra, info in the description. I'm on all forms of social media. And thank you.